Now, the death toll after the earthquake in Syria and Turkey has now exceeded 35,000. As hopes dwindle of pulling more people out of the rubble alive, the UN says it is shifting its focus to finding shelter for survivors.
A moment of joy and relief. A young girl is pulled out alive from the rubble after 7.5 days trapped under a collapsed building. The girl, named Miray, was found in a town in southern Turkey by groups of rescue workers tirelessly digging to find remaining survivors. It is difficult and often dangerous work.
Building inside is super dangerously collapsed, so you cannot just go inside, and you should be really careful also not to harm the people inside. So we are like we say in Turkey, we are digging with our nails. One by one, slowly, slowly, slowly.
But over a week after the earthquake devastated parts of Turkey and Syria, the chances of finding people still trapped alive dwindles with each passing hour. There is a sign of hope for the millions of earthquake victims in northwest Syria after the country's president, Bashar al-Assad, said he will allow 2 new crossing points for the much-needed humanitarian aid to reach the rebel-held region. A move welcomed internationally.
The Assad regime has consistently argued against additional humanitarian crossings, but if the regime is serious about this and if the regime is willing to put those words into action, that would be a good thing for the Syrian people.
Immediate help is needed for millions of people in both Syria and Turkey. As rescue operations for survivors enter their final days, the death toll from the devastation is predicted to rise dramatically.
DW's Jack Parrock is in Adana in Turkey, and earlier he told me more about where rescue efforts stand right now.
Well, the reports of people being pulled from the rubble are coming fewer and further between as the days continue. And many of the people that are actually being pulled out alive are children and certainly young sort of teenagers rather than adults. Watching Turkish rolling TV this morning, what aid workers have started to do is to brand and to put signs up next to the buildings which says "Ses yok," which means no sound. They're marking each building now for places where there is no longer any sound, and they should continue with their rescue efforts elsewhere. 8 days on from when the earthquake first hit, the question is how many more people will have been able to survive for so long underneath the rubble.
Now, Jack, what's needed next, most urgently?
Well, food, water, shelter. Just here where we are in Adana, this is a sort of makeshift tent city that's been put up by AFAD, which is the Turkish Crisis Response Centre. But most of the people here, the people that are just behind me here, they're actually from the city of Adana. Their houses were affected here. But this is an enormous region that has been affected. There are hundreds of thousands of people without shelter still, we believe. The region is affected, was home for about 13 million people, or in the region of that number at least. And there are many parts of this region that still haven't received much humanitarian support. So that is at the airport in Adana at the moment. You can see large numbers of humanitarian aid workers coming in. In fact, some of the people that we were speaking to that were flying in with us said that they had been coming from Kyiv into Turkey to try and support this effort. They are trying to, as I say, house people, find them shelter, find them food, find them water. But also there is a need to start looking long term because so many people's homes were destroyed in this earthquake.
Now, there are allegations of corruption and negligence by building contractors and indeed the government. What have people told you?
Yeah, that's becoming part of the discourse as the days go on now. This region saw a construction boom, and the Turkish authorities have issued warrants for arrest for around 113 people, contractors, who are believed to have broken the earthquake regulation rules. A dozen or so of them have been arrested, publicly filmed being arrested in a sort of show of desire to show that there's something being done about this. But there are also questions about blind eyes that were turned potentially by the authorities to allow these kind of buildings to be built. And that is really sort of one of the focuses now of the discussions here in Turkey about what exactly happened to perhaps allow so many buildings that maybe weren't up to scratch to deal with the earthquakes to be built, bearing in mind that Turkey as a country is one of the worst affected by earthquakes in the world. It sits on 2 fault lines, Gerd.
Jack Parrick then reporting from Adana in Turkey. Thank you, Jack. And as we've seen over the last week, the earthquake has caused unimaginable destruction in the Turkey-Syria border region. This here is Kahramanmaraş, close to the epicenter. The quake flattened multi-story buildings here and reduced entire apartment blocks to dust and rubble. But as you can see here, there are also buildings that stand tall among the rubble and appear to have suffered fairly little damage. In Erzin, that's another district in Hatay province, the quake destroyed no buildings at all and claimed not a single casualty. That's according to the mayor. That's despite the district being in the worst affected area. Now let's try to make sense of all this with Duygu Cihanga Ribeiro in Ankara. She's an expert in city and regional planning with the Middle East Technical University there. Dr. Ribeiro, why are we seeing such a difference in the earthquake's impact within the very same region?
Hello. First of all, I would like to share my deepest condolences with the people of Turkey and especially with the families of the earthquake victims. Of course, when we are talking about an earthquake, the general tendency to call it a natural disaster. But as you have said, there are differences in the region, and we have to mention that the impact was covering more than 10 provinces and more than 400-kilometer long distance. So these areas, you have to understand, has different geomorphological realities, also differences in zoning regulations, zoning development, and of course differences in historically built urban areas as much as the contemporary built areas in Turkey. So it's normal that we see differences in this larger scope, but of course when we talk about the differences in a smaller urban blocks, let's say, and if we still see the wreckage in one building and standing on the other, we can talk about the failures in conducting the building regulations, following up the codes, and especially the control mechanisms to supervise these codes.
Now, does that mean that the damage and the loss of lives could have been drastically lower then?
We believe so as urban planners because there are different soil structures, there are different site selections that can accommodate safer or less safer built environments from our scientific perspectives. And if we build according to this site selection criteria, and if we follow certain regulations, merge with the proper engineering techniques, of course, it's safer to say we would create better living environments and safer conditions in the sense of such horrific events.
Now, lax building codes, but also authorities and contractors have been blamed for this. Do you agree with that?
It's actually a chain of problems. I don't want to just point fingers on one profession or the other. It starts with the central government authorities to control the local governments, let's say, and local governments' capabilities to control the supervision and implementation processes as well. Of course, there will be some person or some group that could easily be understood as the problem because they are building the physical structure, but urban built environment is not only physical, it is produced through very complex political decisions, cultural understandings, and even social life, I would say. So it's not easy for me to just blame the earthquake, as well as it's not easy for me to just blame one professional group, to be honest.
Dr. Duygu Cihanga Ribeiro in the Turkish capital, Ankara, thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you for having me.